The sharp blast of a whistle cut through the crisp autumn air as Zach Sullivan jogged across the muddy field, his worn cleats sinking slightly into the grass with each step. At 32, his body still remembered the movements from his college soccer days, but the heaviness in his shoulders spoke of burdens beyond physical exhaustion. Being a single dad to 8-year-old Max while working 2 jobs wasn't the life he'd imagined, but it was his life and he was determined to make it work. "Dad, did you see that?" Max called out, his small face flushed with excitement as he trapped the ball with surprising skill for his age. Zach's face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that only seemed to appear when Max was around. "Great control, buddy. Now remember what we talked about with passing follow-through with your foot." The community soccer field in Eastbridge wasn't much just a patchy rectangle of grass with makeshift goals, but it was where Zach volunteered as coach every Tuesday and Thursday evening and Saturday morning. It was the one thing he could give his son that didn't cost money they didn't have. "Coach Sullivan," a small voice called from the sidelines where a boy with tousled dark hair stood uncertainly at the edge of the field. "Can I join?" Zach didn't recognize the child, but the hopeful expression on his face was impossible to resist. "Of course. What's your name, pal?" "Ethan," the boy replied, his eyes darting nervously toward the parking lot where a sleek black SUV was parked. "Ethan Vaughn." "Well, Ethan, we're working on passing drills. Why don't you partner with Max over there? He'll show you how it's done." As Ethan ran toward Max, Zach glanced toward the SUV, expecting to see a parent watching from the comfort of their expensive vehicle. Instead, he saw a woman approaching, and something about her made him pause mid-whistle. She walked with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly where she was going, dressed in a simple gray sweater and jeans that somehow looked anything but simple. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and even from this distance, he could see her eyes intently focused on Ethan. "Is this where the community soccer practice happens?" she asked as she reached him, her voice carrying a warmth that contradicted her initially businesslike approach. "Yeah, just a casual thing I run for the neighborhood kids," Zach replied, suddenly aware of the mud on his knees and the fraying hem of his old college team t-shirt. "I'm Zach Sullivan, the coach." "Sophia Vaughn," she replied, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm, decisive. "That's my son, Ethan. We just moved to the area and he's been asking about joining a soccer team." Zach watched Ethan, who was already laughing with Max as they passed the ball back and forth. "He's welcome to join us. We're not exactly Premier League, just neighborhood kids having fun and learning the basics." Sophia smiled, and Zach found himself unexpectedly captivated. There was something genuine about her expression that seemed at odds with the luxury SUV she'd arrived in. That's exactly what he needs. "He's had a lot of changes recently." The hesitation in her voice made Zach wonder, but he didn't pry. As a single dad, he knew all about protecting your child's privacy. "Well, he's in good hands. We meet 3 times a week, and it's all volunteer-based. No fees or anything. No fees." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Not everyone around here can afford organized sports," he explained, gesturing vaguely toward the modest homes visible beyond the field. "I started this because Max wanted to play, but the travel teams were." He trailed off, not wanting to admit the financial strain. "Let's just say out of reach." Sophia studied him for a moment, and Zach had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing more than he intended to reveal. "That's incredibly generous of you," she finally said. "How many kids do you coach?" "About 15 regularly, though it varies. Some of them can't make it consistently because of their parents' work schedules." The practice continued for another 45 minutes, with Zach occasionally glancing toward the sidelines where Sophia had settled on one of the weathered benches. Unlike most parents who buried themselves in their phones, she watched attentively, her eyes following not just her son, but the entire flow of the impromptu training session. As the practice ended and kids began dispersing to waiting parents, Zach found himself approaching Sophia again, drawn by something he couldn't quite define. "Ethan's got natural talent," he said honestly. "Good instincts." "Like his father," she replied, a fleeting shadow crossing her face before she smiled again. Thank you for including him today. What time should we be here on Thursday? Practice starts at 5, but I'm usually here setting up by 4:30, Zach said, then hesitated before adding, I could use another set of hands if you're ever free to help. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. He wasn't in the habit of asking for help, especially not from people he'd just met, particularly not people who drove cars that probably cost more than he made in a year. Sophia started, then glanced at Ethan, who was still chatting animatedly with Max. I think I'd like that. Zach watched them leave, Ethan bouncing excitedly beside his mother, chattering about his new friends and the drills they'd practiced. Something about the pair tugged at him. Perhaps it was the way Sophia listened so intently to her son, or maybe it was the gentle way she'd rested her hand on Ethan's shoulder as they walked away. Dad, I like Ethan, Max declared as they gathered the equipment. He said his dad died, just like Mom. Zach's heart squeezed painfully, as he always did when Max mentioned Emily. 3 years since cancer had taken her, and the wound still felt fresh sometimes. That's tough, buddy. We know how that feels, don't we? Zach said, zipping up the ball bag. Maybe we can be extra nice to him, since we understand. I already told him he can be my best friend, Max said with the straightforward simplicity of childhood. And I told him you're the best dad ever, so he can share you a little bit if he wants. Zach swallowed the sudden lump in his throat. That's pretty generous of you, Max. That night, after tucking Max into bed in their small 2-bedroom apartment, Zach sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills. His day job as a physical education teacher at the local middle school barely covered the rent, and his evening work as a personal trainer at a nearby gym filled in some gaps, but there was never quite enough. Emily's medical bills had depleted their savings, and the life insurance had mostly gone to funeral costs. He rubbed his eyes tiredly, thinking about Sophia Vaughn and her son. There had been a sadness behind her composed demeanor that resonated with him. The weight of solo parenting was unmistakable, regardless of financial circumstances. The expensive car and clothes suggested money, but Zach had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. Thursday arrived with dark clouds threatening rain. Zach rushed to the field directly from school, hoping to get practice in before the weather turned. To his surprise, he found Sophia already there, setting up the cone drills he'd planned. Hope you don't mind, she said as he approached, rain jacket tied around her waist. Ethan couldn't stop talking about soccer, so we came early. I remembered what you said about setup. Zach couldn't help but smile. Mind, you're saving me time, thank you. They worked side by side, and he noticed how efficiently she moved, how quickly she grasped what needed to be done. There was nothing entitled or helpless about Sophia Vaughn. So, what brought you to East Bridge? He asked as they positioned the last of the cones. It's not exactly a destination city. A fresh start, she answered after a moment's hesitation. After James, Ethan's father, died 2 years ago, everything in Boston reminded us of him. I needed somewhere quieter to raise Ethan, somewhere we could both breathe again. The naked honesty in her voice made Zach pause. I understand that. After my wife passed, I thought about leaving too, but this was our home, and I didn't want to take Max away from the memories, the good ones, you know? Sophia nodded, her eyes softening. Different approaches to the same pain. Different approaches, he agreed, feeling an unexpected connection. Kids began arriving, and soon the field was alive with energy. Zach led the practice, but he kept finding his gaze drawn to Sophia, who had seamlessly stepped into a helper role, demonstrating techniques for the younger kids and offering encouragement. She moved with athletic grace, clearly familiar with the sport. You played, he asked during a water break. College team, she confirmed. Nothing spectacular, but I loved it. Me too. University of Massachusetts. Dartmouth, she replied. Zach whistled low. Impressive. A faint blush colored her cheeks. It was a long time ago. The threatening rain finally arrived just as practice ended, a sudden downpour sending kids scurrying to waiting cars. Max and Ethan, however, embraced the weather, running around catching raindrops on their tongues until Zach and Sophia corralled them. My place is just 2 blocks away, Zach found himself saying as they stood under the small shelter of a tree. "If you want to wait out the worst of it, I can make hot chocolate." The invitation was spontaneous, perhaps foolish. His apartment was small, sparsely furnished, nothing like what she was probably used to. Sophia hesitated, looking at Ethan's pleading face and the torrential rain. "Hot chocolate sounds perfect," she finally said. "Lead the way." The walk to his apartment was a mad dash through puddles, all four of them soaked by the time they reached the building. Zach felt a momentary pang of self-consciousness as he unlocked the door to 3B, acutely aware of the contrast between his modest home and whatever Sophia was accustomed to. "Sorry about the mess," he said automatically as they entered, though in truth, he kept the place as neat as possible. "What mess?" Sophia asked, looking around at the small but tidy living room with its well-worn furniture and walls decorated with Max's artwork and a few framed family photos. "This is lovely." There was no condescension in her voice, just simple appreciation that made something in Zach's chest ease. "Dad makes the best hot chocolate," Max announced, already pulling Ethan toward his bedroom. "But first I want to show Ethan my Lego spaceship." As the boys disappeared, Zach grabbed towels from the bathroom and handed one to Sophia. "Kitchen's this way if you want to help with that famous hot chocolate." The kitchen was tiny, forcing them to work in close proximity as Zach heated milk on the stove and Sophia measured cocoa powder and sugar from the containers he indicated. The domesticity of the moment struck him suddenly. How long had it been since he'd shared such a simple task with another adult? "So what do you do?" he asked, stirring the mixture. "For work, I mean." "I'm in finance," she said, and something in her tone made him think there was more to it, but she quickly changed the subject. "And you, teaching and coaching." "Middle school PE teacher by day, personal trainer by evening," he confirmed, "and soccer coach whenever I can squeeze it in." "That's a lot of jobs for one person," Zach shrugged. "It's what works for us right now." "Max is my priority, and this schedule means I'm there for him while still keeping the lights on." Sophia was quiet for a moment, watching him work. "You're a good father, Zach. It's obvious in how Max looks at you, how he talks about you." The simple compliment hit harder than he expected, warming him more effectively than the steaming milk on the stove. "Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water," he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. "But we're managing. That's all any of us can do." Her smile held understanding rather than pity. "Just manage, one day at a time." The boys thundered back into the kitchen just as the hot chocolate was ready. They spent the next hour at the small kitchen table, the rain drumming against the windows as Max and Ethan chattered about school and soccer, while Zach and Sophia exchanged glances over their mugs, sharing silent amusement at the boys' enthusiasm. When the rain finally slowed to a drizzle, Sophia reluctantly announced it was time to leave. At the door, she paused. "Saturday's practice is at 10, right?" she asked. "10 sharp," Zach confirmed. "You'll come." "We wouldn't miss it," she promised, her eyes meeting his with warmth that stayed with him long after she and Ethan had gone. Saturday's practice brought unexpected complications. Zach arrived to find a city maintenance worker posting signs around the field. "Field's being renovated starting Monday," the worker explained. "Won't be available for at least 3 weeks." Zach's heart sank. The community field was the only space he could use without permits or rental fees. 3 weeks without practice would be devastating for the kids who counted on this routine, especially Max, who had found such healing through soccer after losing his mother. "There has to be something we can do," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "There are the fields at Westridge Park," Sophia suggested, having arrived in time to hear the news. "They're maintained by the city's parks department. Those are reservation only with fees," Zach explained. "Most of these families can't afford that, and neither can I." Sophia bit her lip thoughtfully. "Let me make a call." She stepped away, phone pressed to her ear, speaking too quietly for Zach to hear. When she returned, there was a subtle shift in her demeanor, a straightening of her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "It's taken care of," she said. "We can use the Westridge fields for the next month, no charge. Practice can continue as scheduled." Zach stared at her. "How did you? I know some people," she said simply. "It's the least I can do after you've welcomed Ethan so warmly." He wanted to press further, but was interrupted by the arrival of more players. The practice proceeded as normal, though Zach found himself watching Sophia more carefully now, wondering what connections she had that could secure premium playing fields with a single phone call. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Sophia and Ethan became fixtures at practices, with Sophia gradually taking on more coaching responsibilities. She had a natural way with the kids, firm but encouraging, and her technical knowledge of the game impressed Zach. They fell into an easy rhythm of co-coaching that made the sessions run more smoothly than they ever had before. After Saturday practices, it became customary for the four of them to grab lunch together at the local diner, where Max and Ethan would demolish stacks of pancakes while Zach and Sophia talked. He learned that she was 34, that she loved old movies and hated cilantro, that she could recite entire passages from To Kill a Mockingbird from memory. What she didn't talk about was her work beyond vague references to The Office or a project, and Zach began to suspect that, in finance, was a significant understatement. There were other clues: the way she sometimes took calls that required her to step away and speak in hushed, authoritative tones, the sleek laptop she occasionally brought to practices to work during breaks, the subtle deference shown to her by staff at restaurants when they recognized her. But none of that seemed to matter during their conversations, which ranged from parenting challenges to favorite books to childhood memories. With each passing week, Zach found himself more drawn to Sophia, not just her beauty, but her strength, her kindness, the way she listened when he spoke as if his words truly mattered. One evening after practice, as they watched Max and Ethan kicking a ball around while they packed up equipment, Sophia said, "Ethan asked if you and Max would like to come to our house for dinner tomorrow. I make a mean lasagna, apparently." "Apparently," Zach teased. "You don't know for sure." She laughed, a sound he had come to treasure. "Ethan's standard for mean food is anything that isn't burned, so take the compliment with a grain of salt." "We'd love to come," Zach said, perhaps too quickly. "Just text me your address." When Sophia's text arrived later that night, Zach nearly dropped his phone. The address was in Oak Ridge Estates, the most exclusive neighborhood in the area. Houses there started at 7 figures. The next evening, as he and Max drove through the imposing gates of Oak Ridge Estates, Zach felt a growing uneasiness. He'd suspected Sophia was comfortable financially, but this was another level entirely. They followed the GPS to a sprawling modern home set back from the road, its clean lines and glass walls gleaming in the early evening light. "Whoa," Max breathed from the backseat. "Ethan lives in a mansion." Zach parked his 12-year-old Honda beside a row of luxury vehicles in the circular driveway, feeling distinctly out of place. He'd worn his best clothes, which meant his only non-faded jeans and a button-down shirt without any frayed cuffs, but suddenly felt woefully underdressed. Before they could reach the front door, Ethan burst out to greet them, with Sophia following at a more measured pace. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and looked so breathtakingly beautiful that Zach momentarily forgot his anxiety. "You found us," she said with a smile that seemed almost nervous. "Your directions were perfect," he replied, handing her the bottle of wine he'd splurged on a whole $20, which now seemed laughably inadequate. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior: soaring ceilings, museum-worthy art, furniture that looked both expensive and uncomfortable. But Sophia led them past the formal areas to a warm, inviting kitchen at the back of the house, where the promised lasagna was bubbling in the oven. "The boys wanted to eat in the meatier room and watch a movie," she explained as she poured him a glass of wine. "I hope that's okay with you." "Max would consider that heaven," Zach assured her, relaxing slightly as he leaned against the kitchen island. This space, at least, felt lived in, with children's artwork magnetized to the refrigerator and cookbooks open on the counter. Once the boys were settled with their dinner and a Disney movie, Sophia served plates of lasagna at the kitchen table rather than the formal dining room Zach had glimpsed. I thought this would be more comfortable, she said, reading his thoughts. Less intimidating, he supplied with a wry smile. She winced slightly. I should have told you about all this. She gestured vaguely to encompass the house. That you're apparently extremely successful in finance. Zach kept his tone light, though his mind was racing with questions. Sophia took a deep breath. I'm the CEO of Vaughn Capital Management. The company was James's. Originally he founded it, but I took over after his death. We manage investments for high net worth individuals and institutions. Zach tried to process this information. Vaughn Capital was a name he'd seen in financial news headlines, a major player in the investment world. So you're not just well off, you're wealthy, she finished for him. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? The question came out more hurt than he intended. Sophia set down her fork. At first it was just habit. I've learned to be careful about who knows. People treat you differently when they know you have money. She looked directly at him. Then, as I got to know you, I was afraid it would change things between us. You're the first person since James died who sees me as just Sophia, not as Sophia Vaughn of Vaughn Capital. The raw honesty in her voice made Zach pause. He thought about their interactions over the past weeks, how she volunteered at every practice, how she sat in the rain watching drills, how she laughed over greasy diner food with him and the boys. Does this change things? She asked quietly. Knowing, Zach considered the question carefully. It explains some things like how you got the Westridge Fields with one phone call, but change things. No, you're still the woman who helps 8-year-olds perfect their passing technique and argues with me about whether cilantro tastes like soap. Relief washed over her face. For what it's worth, I've loved these past weeks. Working with you, getting to know Max, it's the most normal I've felt in years. Normal is underrated, Zach said with a smile. After dinner, they joined the boys for the end of the movie, the four of them crowded together on the oversized couch. Zach was acutely aware of Sophia beside him, their shoulders touching, and wondered if she could hear his heart hammering in his chest. When it was time to leave, the boys protested vehemently, but Zach held firm it was a school night after all. As Max and Ethan said their goodbyes, Sophia walked Zach to the door. Thank you for coming, she said, and for understanding. Thank you for the invitation, he replied, and the perspective. My apartment probably seems pretty pathetic in comparison. Sophia's hand reached out to touch his arm. Don't say that. Your home is warm and full of love. That's what matters. She hesitated, then added softly, it feels more like a home than this place ever has. Something in her expression, vulnerability mixed with hope, made Zach's breath catch. Before he could second-guess himself, he leaned down and kissed her gently. Her lips were soft, warm, and for a moment, everything else fell away. The wealth gap between them, the complications, the uncertainties. When they parted, Sophia's eyes remained closed for a beat before opening, a smile spreading across her face. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, he admitted. What took you so long? She whispered back. The kiss changed everything and nothing. They still met at soccer practices, still took the boys for pancakes afterward. But now there were lingering touches, private smiles, and the occasional kiss when the boys weren't looking. Zach still worked his multiple jobs, and Sophia still ran her company, but they carved out time for each other whenever possible. 2 months into their relationship, Sophia approached him after practice with unusual hesitation. There's a charity gala next weekend for the Children's Hospital, she said. I'm on the board, so I have to attend. Would you come with me? Zach understood what she was asking. This would be their first public appearance together in her world, not his. The thought was intimidating, but the hopeful look in her eyes made his answer easy. I'll need to rent a tux, he said, and find a sitter for Max. Actually, I was thinking both boys could stay with my sister for the night. She adores Ethan, and he's been asking for a sleepover with Max. The gala was as grand as Zach had imagined: crystal chandeliers, champagne flowing freely, people whose net worth probably exceeded the GDP of small nations. He felt out of place in his rented tuxedo, acutely aware that he was the odd man out in this glittering crowd. But then Sophia appeared at his side in a stunning emerald gown, slipping her arm through his, and suddenly it didn't matter. Throughout the evening, she introduced him simply as Zach Sullivan, Max's father, with no explanation of his job or their relationship. Yet the way she looked at him, leaned into him, laughed with him, made their connection clear to everyone. Later, as they danced, Sophia rested her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for coming tonight. I know this isn't your scene." "I'd go anywhere with you," he said honestly. "Though I'll admit, I prefer the soccer field to this," she laughed softly. "So do I, actually." The music shifted to a slower tempo, and Sophia lifted her head to look at him. "Zach, there's something I need to tell you." The seriousness in her tone made him tense. "What is it?" "I've been offered a position on the Federal Reserve Board. It would mean moving to Washington." Zach felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. "When would you go?" "That's just it. I've decided to decline the offer," she said, surprising him. "I realized something these past months. Ethan is happier than I've seen him since his father died. He has friends, he loves soccer, he adores Max and you." She took a deep breath. "And I've fallen in love with you." The world seemed to pause around them as her words registered. "You're turning down the Federal Reserve Board for us." "For all of us," she corrected. "For the life we could build together, if that's what you want too." Zach searched her eyes, finding nothing but sincerity. "I love you too, Sophia, but I don't want you sacrificing your career for me." "I'm not sacrificing anything important," she said firmly. "I can run Vaughn Capital from anywhere, and there will be other opportunities. What I can't replace is this us, the boys, the family we're creating." Family, the word resonated through him. "Are you sure?" In answer, she kissed him, there in the middle of the dance floor surrounded by Boston's elite. When they parted, both a little breathless, she smiled. "I've never been more certain of anything." 1 year later, Zach stood on the sidelines of the East Bridge Youth Soccer League championship game, watching Max and Ethan play side by side on the team he and Sophia had built together. The league, funded by a charitable foundation Sophia had established, now served over 200 kids from all economic backgrounds, with scholarships ensuring that no child was turned away for financial reasons. Beside him, Sophia cheered as Max made a perfect pass to Ethan, who drove the ball toward the goal. "They're getting good," Zach said proudly. "Really good." "They have excellent coaches," Sophia replied, slipping her hand into his, wedding rings clinking softly together. They had married 6 months earlier, in a ceremony attended by both the children they coached, and Sophia's high-powered business associates worlds colliding in a celebration of their unlikely love story. They lived in a house that was larger than Zach's old apartment, but smaller than Sophia's mansion, a compromise that felt like home to all of them. Zach still taught PE, though he'd been able to drop his evening training job. Sophia still ran her company, though she'd restructured it to allow her more family time. Together, they coached soccer 3 times a week, rain or shine. "No regrets?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, unable to quite believe his good fortune. Sophia's answer was always the same. "Not a single one." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Though I do have some news." "Oh," Zach glanced down at her, eyebrows raised. "I was going to wait until after the game, but..." She placed his hand on her stomach, still flat but carrying their future. "The team's getting a new member in about 7 months." Joy exploded through him as he wrapped her in his arms, lifting her off her feet. "Really? You're sure?" "Doctor confirmed it yesterday," she said, laughing as he spun her around. On the field, Max and Ethan had spotted them and were waving frantically, momentarily distracted from the game. Zach set Sophia down and they both waved back, united in their love for the boys who had brought them together. "Should we tell them tonight?" Zach asked, his arm still around her waist. "Let's wait until after the game," Sophia decided. "Win or lose, they'll have something to celebrate." As they turned their attention back to the match, Zach marveled at how dramatically his life had changed in just over a year, from a struggling single dad to part of a family that was stronger and more loving than he'd dared to hope for. All because he'd offered to coach a boy whose mother turned out to be so much more than she first appeared. "I love you," he whispered into Sophia's hair. "All of you." Her hand found his again, squeezing gently. "And we love all of you right back." Together they watched their sons play, united by soccer and the unexpected journey that had brought them to each other, a journey that was still unfolding with new joys and challenges ahead. but that they would face as they had from the beginning, side by side, stronger together than they ever could have been apart.